What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, good to be back. Good to be back. I was off the grid for a few days. I was in Chicago with Claire, solo parents through the airport. We survived. We are here. Live to tell the tale. Outside of James Franklin getting Penn State to write Jim Knowles, basically a blank check. Did I miss anything?
Nothing too crazy. I would just stay out of the news cycle. But how was Chicago?
Chicago was great. Did not go outside once. So for those wondering, how did you deal with the weather in January? I didn't.
Didn't.
I
Way to
just
do it.
didn't at all. Yeah, it was lovely. Outside of walking from O'Hare to my mom's car and then walking out of my mom's car into O'Hare, that was the essentially the extent of me dealing with the elements, but had a great time. Had a really nice time. It was great to be able to go back to Chicago with Claire, see family, see friends, and basically just chase her around their house for 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. So had a nice little weekend. End of the college football season. First time I can say to Lauren, don't be a parent for a few days and let me take care of it. So that felt good to be able to do that. And had a nice time with Claire. And the airport is a daunting place to go solo with a toddler, but I'm here and that's all that matters.
Listen, well, half of that journey was the Orlando airport, so you fit right in. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Glad to have you back. Glad to have you a little recharge. I know you said you were solo parenting, but it's good to kind of take that, little trip. Kind of the opposite of Cancun, Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Call it that. And speaking of Chicago, that's what I did actually. I'm looking at a post that we did with Trinity Rodman, Dennis's daughter. And we had NWSL Media Days. Really proud of my team and how they did there. So yeah, it was in LA, like right after all, the fire stuff and everything. So really just a wild kind of couple of days, but really cool, really cool. We got to do this kind of charity giveaway with Adidas that we, gave a check to a fan who had like lost their home in a fire and everything. So it's been a really sort of whirlwind week. But now we're back at it. I'm glad to be seeing your smiling face, man.
Trinity Rodman should have been the lead of this. And I should have not gone on. That should have been the more relevant Chicago tie-in to this, other than what I had to say. But that's awesome, man. Good to
No,
be.
I mean to like upstate. I just was thinking of Chicago. I was like, oh yeah, look at. But yeah, it's been, after the season, it's good to just kind of relax and think about something else. And unless you're looking for a defensive coordinator like Penn State, but luckily most of our teams have our stuff wrapped up, and we can just enjoy our families.
Well, yeah, I mean, Penn State now I think is sitting there wondering if it could be Ohio State and let the journey begin, let the offseason begin with all the spending in the world. It is officially the offseason. I know there are people, Josh Pate, who don't allow us to be able to say the offseason, but this is the first official offseason pod. As I said the other day, our offseason flow will be to record on Monday and Thursday with pods that come out on Tuesday and Friday until further notice. That's going to kind of be the plan for today. Jim Dunaway, he's going to join us in a bit to talk about all things Bama. And then we've got Lad of the Week and then a quick note from Will on his apology to the Midwest that we will get to. We were going to be putting a pin in that. Will, can we talk some quarterback rankings? Is it too early?
I would love to.
Nothing gets the offseason juices flowing like some way too early quarterback rankings. That's what we're going to do. Way too early quarterback rankings in the SEC for 2025. I think some years it's almost impossible to do this because of how much turnover there is. And then there are other years like last year where you very quickly realize that it's darn near impossible for someone to crack the top 5. This year, I'd say the SEC's quarterback outlook somewhere in between, loaded, but it's more predicated on promise. And I think we've got smaller sample sizes than last year when there were 5 quarterbacks in the SEC who are either coming off of a playoff berth or a New Year's Six bowl victory. This year, Nico is the only one that you can say that about returning to the SEC. And spoiler alert, I don't have Nico in my top 5 in the SEC. We're going to get a little spicy, a little bit spicy today. Here's how I do my rankings for this, just so that we're perfectly clear, because I know sometimes you can go in a variety of directions with this, and I'm okay with that. But I think every one of these rankings should have a bit of a disclaimer, because maybe it'll make more sense if you're going by the lens that I'm looking at, as opposed to just simply who's going to fill up the stat sheet and do all of those things. I do my rankings treating it like a schoolyard football draft. Who am
True.
I who am I trusting to go win me a game played in week 1 of the 2025 season? It's really hard to do this, but I try as much as possible to have controlled variables for the surrounding pieces. And let me repeat that because some of you will overlook that and pretend that everyone is playing with these same exact surroundings when they really aren't. And you'll probably base too much of your rankings based on those surroundings and not who these quarterbacks actually are. But again, as hard as it is, I try to have controlled variables for the surrounding pieces. Okay.
Hmm.
I am not predicting who will lead the SEC in touchdown passes. I am not predicting who will win the most games. I am not saying that this quarterback will end up hoisting the national championship trophy and having the confetti fall on them. I am not saying these things by putting this guy ahead of that guy. I am saying, based on what I have seen and what I believe these guys will become week 1, these are the guys that I believe will play the position at the highest level in the SEC. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, and just a quick note on that, we often get caught up with MVP awards, Heisman, stuff like that, where it's like these guys have crazy numbers. And like to your point, this is kind of the opposite of that, where it's like, hey, again, take the system out of it. If you put this quarterback in that system, like I remember last year I took like Will Howard in the quarterback draft. And I was like, I don't think Will Howard's awesome, but he's at Ohio State. So he's
Yeah,
gonna end up same thing with Dylan Gabriel, who ended up obviously like doing really well too. So this is not that. This is if you put that player on Ohio State or on Georgia or Texas, how would they play basically?
exactly. And Will Howard's a good comp because he ends up winning a national championship. But at the same time, I don't think that if you're looking at this through the lens of who would I want to have all things neutral, neutral weapons, neutral offensive minds that you're working with, I don't think Will Howard would have been a top 5 selection for that. And I'm
Right.
okay with that. That's not disrespect. He did what he had to do to win a national championship. That's kind of all that matters. But we're talking about who's going to be able to play the position at the highest level. So I'm just going to go through the top 10. And in the SEC, we won't necessarily get into 11 through 16 and sift through quarterback battles that could be unfolding. But I will say Ty Simpson, Jackson Arnold, Bo Pabula, and John Mateer did not make my top 10. I'm going to save the Simpson part for the Dunaway discussion. We'll talk about
Mhm.
him a little bit more later. And then also hark back to the transfer portal superlative pod that we did 2 pods ago for more of kind of an in-depth breakdown of Arnold and Mateer. But I'm seeing Mateer show up in these.
Sorry, I love Dunaway. That's like having a podcast with Barty for me, man. I grew up listening to him. That's so cool.
That's why we call him the legend, man. Dunaway's
He's
the
like,
best.
it's just so cool. Oh yeah, Dunaway's up next. Just like growing up hearing that. Anyway, because I went to high school in Alabama, like we always talk about. That was like the guy to listen to down there.
Yeah, he is. He's one of a kind. We love us some
Yeah.
Jim Dunaway. But so like I'm seeing a lot of these way too early quarterback rankings, and I'll see Mateer on there among the top 10, not just returning quarterbacks in the SEC, but returning quarterbacks in all of college football. And I scratch my head a little bit when I see that. Clearly, I disagree because I don't have him in the top 10 in the SEC. I believe that he can join that conversation by season's end. Maybe he's got all SEC upside, but here's what I would say. Should we be that sold on a guy with 1 year of FBS starts that came mostly against Mountain West competition? Okay.
Hmm.
Because again, best quarterback rating in America during the month of November, that was based on games against Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, and Wyoming. Again,
But he
that's good.
himself is a Pac-12 quarterback. We can't forget that.
Yes, technically a Pac 2 quarterback.
And when they played their one conference game, he showed up anyway.
He did. And even though you look at the sample size and the power conference games, whatever you want to call him, he has a 136 quarterback ranking. That's solid. He did really well with his legs as well. 2 of those defenses were outside the top 100 in scoring. The other was Washington in September when they had so many new pieces early in the season, and Mateer's offense had 24 points. So I'm not trying to just diminish that or say that it's irrelevant, but I would say context is needed there. I
Mhm.
love that the full playbook is going to be on display with him. It's a huge plus. I talk about how he's willing to take those chances downfield. Sometimes that's really beneficial. Sometimes that can hurt you. But I feel like he's going to be able to open up the field for Oklahoma in a way that we didn't see this past season. That's a positive. I just feel like with him especially, I'm going to need to see him handle a respected SEC defense before I assume that it's even better than someone like Gunnar Stockton, who faced 2 of the 3 best defenses in the country and probably did more good than bad in that sample size. So that's kind of where I stand with Mateer, even though I realize I'm going to be kind of in the minority by having him that low and trying to hold off some of my excitement, even though I rated him as the number one transfer quarterback in the SEC. Just don't quite think he has shown enough against legit competition to make me think he's immediately one of these guys from the moment he steps on the field.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely hear that. And I think that, not to get into the particulars of all this, but those guys often, like we talked about what goes into a quarterback transferring, right? And a lot of it is, a little bit of that hopium where it's like, oh, obviously a guy's leaving a situation, right? I don't want to get into that, but it's the fact that if this guy could have been a perfect product there where he was, if he was facing a level of competition that would have made him into a first round pick, he wouldn't be here. So there are always those questions when you get a transfer quarterback, unless it's a crazy, like even a Carson Beck situation in Miami. It's like, well, you know what the problems are, right? So I think that's very fair. We love to get caught up in and I'm seeing college football turn more and more into the NBA, where you love the headline, we love the offseason, we love that type of stuff. And so that guy is going to get pushed way up the rankings over some guys like you just discussed. So I'm on board with that.
And for those saying, well, we just saw guys like Curtis Rourke and Diego Pavia, who we're going to get to in a bit here, go from lower levels of football, which let's be honest, that's what Washington State was facing this past year in the situation that they were in, and then become studs at higher level places. Why can't Mateer do that? Mateer can do that. He just hasn't played nearly as much football as Rourke and Pavia did entering the situation or any the situation that he's coming into. So I think that's just worth remembering as we sit here and talk about him. All right, top 10. Let's start with Taylor Green,
My
for local
boy.
quarterback, trademark pending.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds low. It sounds low to only have him at 10. But if I'm an Arkansas fan, I still feel optimistic about him because in a given day, he might look like one of the conference's best quarterbacks, and that beats the alternative. He'll also benefit from continuity. But again, we're trying to control the variables here as much as possible and not just say automatically, oh, he's going to perform like this because he's got Bobby Petrino coming back as his offensive coordinator. A big thing with me though is if I feel like certain guys are hard to trust and there is a noticeable drop off against elite competition, we have to talk about that. When I was putting these rankings together 2 weeks ago for SDS, I realized that all 23 of Taylor Green's touchdowns came against teams that were unranked in the AP poll at the time that this was coming out, and that 0 came against the 4 ranked teams that they faced. And I even put the disclaimer 2 weeks ago. I was like, hey, I think LSU is going to end up ranked in the final AP poll, so this will change a little bit. LSU
Well,
did not end up ranked in the final AP poll, so this
how about
changed
that SEC
nothing.
bias? We've totally just lost it. Now the SEC sucks. We can't even get ranked as an LSU team that finished strong. Look at this.
Yeah, not to say that that would have totally changed the argument, because obviously he struggled that day as well. But
Mhm.
still, part of that is because he ends up unfortunately being banged up in those key games against Tennessee. He wasn't fully healthy against Ole Miss. Still, though, Green, I think at this stage of his career, if we're being honest, is still more intriguing than bona fide all SEC guy entering the season. Still too mistake prone for me to say he's one of the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in this conference.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of that is, risk level that we're comfortable with, right? And like that's one of the things I often talk about the things that we're, similar on. That's the thing that we're very different people on. Like I love some risk. I love some unknown. I love some chaos.
To
Just a
watch or to
I'm talking about my life. I'm talking about like just me and you as people, right? And
oh,
so
okay.
someone like you can't make someone really less risk averse as a human being. You know what I'm saying? Like I can be in the corporate meeting, but I'll still tell a joke here and there. I always got to have that little smile on my face. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like if you were a quarterback, you would never be the guy who would throw in a triple coverage and just somebody down there. You know what I'm saying? And so Taylor Green's fault, to your point, is that he's very comfortable with risk, maybe too much. Maybe he sees that guy coming out of the blind side and he goes, instead of trying to crumple for a sack, I'm going to try to make something happen. Boom, I just had the goofiest fumble you've ever seen. And so I think that does sometimes put a ceiling on Taylor Green. I don't think either of us really expects Arkansas to win a national title with Taylor Green. Not going to break any news here, but that's the style of quarterback that Kirby Smart does not like. And Carson Beck was kind of the exception there. And that's why Jake Fromm started for as long as he did and stuff like that. So I think that he's a great quarterback if your team is not great. He can come up with a lot of stuff. He can raise your floor. He can also lower your floor. But if you're in a situation where you need that, it doesn't really matter if you lose by 10 or 20 if he can make the plays to put you within striking distance like he did with Texas.
Yeah, and I do think that his upside is certainly limited, despite the fact that within a game, he can make those plays that just make you go, wow, that felt special. I'm not
Hmm.
used to seeing a 6'6" quarterback turn the corner the way that he just did to be able to move the sticks and extend a drive. And that stuff is really fun. The willingness to make some of those throws. You're right. You can't teach that. But I think just in terms of overall confidence that he can go out and just
Hmm.
will a team to a game that's not supposed to win, because let's remember the way that the Tennessee game played out, the true game that they weren't supposed to win. I
Hmm.
guess Oklahoma State was hanging there. That didn't age well, and obviously it was a game that they still end up losing.
Right.
But the Tennessee game is the one game that you could say that about, and he doesn't end up finishing that game. It ends up being Malachi Singleton who comes in and sort of gets the save, so to speak,
Right.
in a low scoring defensive fuel type game. So there is still those questions that remain of like, yeah, he can make those spectacular plays. He's still not making those spectacular plays against elite competition, and
Right.
that's why I would hold back on him. All right, number 9, Gunnar Stockton. Tough guy to rank. Really, really tough guy to rank. I had moments where I had him as high as 7 or 8, and then I had moments where I left him outside of the top 10. And maybe that's why I compromised at 9 with him. But it's a super small sample size, and it's all against elite competition that really couldn't have been more elite.
Yep.
That's brutal. That's super, super unique. I am judging him on 6 quarters of football against the defenses that finished 1-2 in America in opposing quarterback ranking.
Yep.
That's it. That's what we got. That's what we're working with here. And I talked at length about Notre Dame's defensive prowess with extra rest, which Will Howard was able to rise above that, be able to win the national championship game, but it was still a thing. Okay. And it was still a thing that we had to take into account. Stockton just doesn't quite have that mental clock yet. The backside pressure that he struggled with against Notre Dame, especially, but also against Texas at moments as well. Uh, I'm not even sure that Arch Manning has that full mental clock just yet, a guy that we'll get to in a little bit. But Stockton is going to be a factor in the quarterback run game. I think he's going to be able to extend plays. The arm isn't going to hold him back. Lost in the shuffle of that Arian Smith play with the Parker Jones penalty that happened, that ends up being just one of those, like, it's not Georgia's day when something like that happens and a walk
Yep.
on interferes with an official. Stockton on that play hangs tough. He uncorks that pass as he's just about to get drilled. And that ball was in a very small window to an in stride Smith. He had over the top help that he had to deal with as well. And that throw was the type of thing that if you're a Georgia fan, you will watch that on repeat this offseason going, we're going to have some juice. We're going to have some capabilities with this offense next year. That was elite stuff. Obviously, he hasn't had a chance to be able to do this consistently yet. I believe he can, though ranking him higher on this list would feel optimistic and a bit too projection-y as opposed to what we've seen in this extremely limited, extremely unique sample size.
Yes, and this is one where I do want to consider the surroundings in actually kind of a bad way, almost similar to like Bryce Young when he was at Alabama, because you see the logo on the side of the helmet, you think, oh, this is Georgia, they're gonna have these weapons, they're gonna have these pass catchers, but he walked into a situation that was not his team, right? Carson Beck was a leader of that team, he was at media days, all that, but he did have to deal with the drops. He did have to deal with the Dylan Bell drop. He did have to deal with the receivers, and he had Mike Bobo. So playing against those two defenses with that offensive coordinator and with those weapons, I almost want to give him more points, as weird as that is. It's like, hey, if you're at random SEC school, I'm just going to pick Mississippi State. It's like Mississippi State kind of has a better like offensive situation, weirdly, than Georgia because you can't trust the receivers at Georgia. And so, yeah, I actually think that that's as good as you could do for a dress rehearsal and playing in the SEC. I think he played really solid outside of that one really weird pass against Texas. So it was just like, why do you throw that, son? But everybody, has one of them. I'd rather it come like that where it's so bad that you can coach it. So point being, I was really impressed by him, but just the sample size. It's the opposite of Mateer, where it's like
Yeah.
you have a small sample size of great competition. I just need to see more of it.
Yeah, just need to see much, much more of it for me to feel like he's capable of becoming that guy that can just step up and lead an offense and be, one of those guys that ends up having 30 to 35 touchdowns and is doing so for a playoff team, not a liability, but a guy that's really moving this team forward. Number 8, Another small sample size guy. Austin Simmons, the Ole Miss quarterback. I had a few Oklahoma fans wondering why Simmons got the benefit of the doubt over Mateer. I get it. I'll be honest. One of the biggest drives of the regular season was what he came in and did against Georgia, and that's part of this ranking. Okay, it just is. Doing that when your heart rate is supposed to be at, I don't know, 190, 200 against a defense that it'd be one thing if Georgia's defense had been on its heels all day or something like that. And you step in and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm the you know what. I can pick apart this defense too. Let's do it. Georgia's defense just destroyed Jackson Dart on that first drive of that game. And you have to step in, and all of a sudden you're given the reins to a situation that you did not think you were walking into. And he just delivered one of the more clutch drives you'll ever see at a first quarter of a football game. I
Mhm.
mean, truly, it was unbelievable watching him operate. He ends up going 5 of 6 on that drive. So it's not like he was, coming out here and setting the world on fire with this, like like 3 or 4 plays of 25 yards downfield, just dropping it into a bucket. It wasn't that. So I don't want to make a bigger deal of this than this needs to be. But it was impressive. It was really, really impressive. And I also think the other element to remember with Austin Simmons is the Walker Howard situation. Okay. As a redshirt freshman, Simmons beat out a guy that Ole Miss, Will, you're an LSU fan. We could say Ole Miss absolutely poured some resources into Walker Howard to get him on board with that program.
Right.
Okay. Like that's a foregone conclusion. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, and I mean Lane Kiffin loves to win like the PR stuff like that. Like even going into the safety who shall remain nameless that they picked up this year. I think that sometimes he does this stuff to kind of get into his rival's head. So I think it's definitely right.
I want Sage Ryan to become an all SEC player. I really do. I'm rooting for you, Sage. That is still significant in my opinion. Just the fact that he beat him out,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden when he was getting second team reps, everybody, even like Ole Miss beat reporters, like, oh, that's something. He did that as an 18-year-old who famously moved up 2 classes to be able to enroll at Ole Miss in 2023, do the 2-sport deal. He's going to pitch in baseball and all that. You are not climbing the ladder like that if you're not special. And in the limited sample size that we have seen of Austin Simmons, I just think that the lefty has a lot to offer. I think he's going to be ready to face SEC competition from the jump. And that's maybe a little bit too much of a gut connect the dots sort of thing. Again, I'm not trying to just focus on the system and how that so often elevates the floor of who you are as a quarterback, but I just think Austin Simmons is a dude and he's kind of ready for the spotlight.
Yeah, it's kind of like trusting Lane Kiffin to a degree is what it is. Because Lane Kiffin's smart when it comes to quarterback. So it's like, hey, if we've seen this, I'm going to trust what you're seeing in practice and that you're so committed to this guy over Walker Howard. I get it.
I don't know that Kiffin is one to bail. You know what? He has been one to bail on a transfer guy. So I don't want to say that necessarily because it's kind of his
Our
model,
buddy from
right?
Oklahoma State, pour one out.
Yeah, that's right. Spencer Sanders. There are a few other situations, certain former receiver from Texas A&M that post spring that didn't shake out too well. But this, if you're going to recruit as often as you do in the portal, then you kind of need that to be a selling point moving forward and not have the coveted guy after his freshman year really have no chance of playing whatsoever. I mean, you recruited over him once and then you benched him another time. And maybe we'll look back and be like, well, yeah, I mean, Austin Simmons was just a better player than Walker Howard, and there's nothing more to make of that. But still, I think we need to remember those dynamics as well. Number 7, Marcel Reed, the Texas A&M quarterback. The best thing that I can say about Marcel Reed right now isn't that the LSU game happened. Okay. Don't mean to take shots at you. Okay. We all know that it happened.
Mhm.
Or that he actually led the highest scoring offense against SEC competition. Isn't that kind of a weird thing to process? That Michael Casagrande threw that stat out there, and I have been thinking about it ever since then. The best thing that I can say about Marcel Reed is that he fights.
Yeah.
Absolutely a fighter. Not just the LSU game where he comes in throwing haymakers, but they fall behind early in that South Carolina game. And it's looking like it's going to be 2022 Tennessee all over again at Williams-Brice. And they actually led in the final minute of the first half of that game. Now, the second half, South Carolina ends up running away with that game. But the poise that he showed when that place was on tilt and Sandstorm was going off, and he's like, nope, I'm just going to keep going out there. I'm going to keep playing. The Auburn game, They fall behind 21 to nothing in the first 17 minutes of that game. And then Reed leads them to a 4 overtime game, which should have been a 5 overtime game if they didn't have the drop on the
Right.
two-point conversion. So you kind of look at those moments, and even though they end up blowing the bowl game, and it looks like you know what, A&M just didn't have the pieces, and we kind of criticize some of the limitations of this team and how much they struggled down the stretch, and it's a bit of the A&M of old with that. Lost in the shuffle of that was Reed led him on a drive late to be able to win that game and to take the lead in the final 2 minutes. And he was really good when USC had all the momentum. So I love a guy that can do that. I love that, he brings a lot to the table, even though I think we would all agree that passing consistency needs to improve. But I think with a full offseason, you're about to see him look like a more complete player. And while I try and control the variables as much as possible with this discussion, I think a full offseason being developed by Colin Klein in that offense, I think the fit in that scheme is going to do him wonders, and he's going to step on the field in 2025 and look like a legitimate strength for A&M.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've only seen a fraction of what, we hope he can be. But that being said, we've seen that in, to your point, the highest scoring offense against SEC competition. And yeah, you could talk about like there are definitely some bad moments in there, right? Like there were definitely like there were some bruises, there were some blemishes. Weirdly, I would start to blame that more on like kind of everything but him, as weird as it says. Like he
A
had
lot of
mistakes.
defensive issues down the stretch that they
Yeah,
had.
like
Yeah.
there was some weird, but when we talk about even like the play calling, like some of the weird special team stuff, even it's like, what is he supposed to do about that? So exactly to your point, it's like, hey, maybe if he became, Manziel in that South Carolina game and had, 200 rushing yards and 300 passing yards and 8 touchdowns, maybe they come back. But based on what you could expect out of a guy who was first year as a starter, stuff like that. So I love him. It goes to knowing the playbook, trusting yourself, moving the ball, right? We know he can move the ball. We know he trusts himself. The playbook, he wasn't supposed to be the incumbent starter, right? So of course you're gonna shorten the playbook.
I didn't even know he was going to be the backup for sure because Jalen
Right.
Henderson was good down the stretch last year and he beat
Yeah.
him out. We just talked about how significant that was with Austin Simmons beating out Walker Howard. And while that was kind of the first time you're like, oh, they must really like this dude. Same thing with Marcel Reed. And he had the bowl game the previous year where Henderson gets hurt, but to
Mhm.
ultimately take that backup job and run away with it and then be good enough in practice to where they felt really comfortable turning to him once Wigman wasn't at full strength, to me, that was really significant. And Reed deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and I think that like especially when it comes to evaluating guys' potential, I'm gonna start to limit myself when people say, "Oh, well, what happened?" Like if things were different, they would be different, basically. So with Reed, yeah, he threw 2 passes against LSU, and that game was close. Well, LSU couldn't stop his legs. Why should he have thrown more than 2 passes? That game plan was awesome. He smoked LSU in that second half. And so, like, it's the same thing. People said this about Jaden Daniels. They were like, well, he can't throw over the middle. He can. He's just faster than everyone. Why should he? He could average 20 yards a carry in some games. Why would he throw it to a tight end who's going to fall down for 5? So, same deal here. He's succeeding in the SEC with a truncated playbook. So, I'm not going to then go, well, what happens if he throws it 40 times a game? Well, he shouldn't have to if he's doing everything right.
Sure. And that's maybe a good point to segue into our next guy, because I have Nico at 6. Nico Iamaleava, the Tennessee quarterback, is someone that I'm realizing kind of early in the offseason, Will. I think I might end up being as low on him as anyone who does these rankings to only have him at 6 in the SEC. And I don't really want to turn this into hating on Nico because I do still think he could become an all SEC guy who leads Tennessee to another playoff berth. Maybe he could lead Tennessee to a playoff victory. We just talked about how it wouldn't be, he could make, the Tennessee outlook feel a bit ridiculous, because I didn't have him in my way too early top 10, but he can make that look dumb if he takes that next step. And that's still on the table, but you just didn't get the sense that Heupel fully trusted him, and it felt more like he wanted to protect him,
Mhm.
and he didn't want him to go out there and take a game over with his legs or pick defenses apart. That just wasn't part of the game plan in what became a limited Tennessee offense.
Mhm.
He did it would have been great if Tennessee could have added some of these elements and had days where Dylan Sampson, hey, you only need to have 13 carries instead of being super banged up down the stretch and basically unable to play in the playoff game, even on extra rest. but only 15% of his throws traveled 20 yards downfield. That was a shade less than Diego Pavia, who we'll get to in a second here, which is significant in itself. And it felt like Pavia never attacked the field after the Bama game, at least not in the regular season. Now, he did in the Georgia Tech game, but Nico in those spots had a 38% adjusted completion percentage. Just for a little perspective, you might be looking at that number and going, what does that mean to me? We criticized the deep ball with Quinn Ewers. He had a 43.6% adjusted completion percentage, which accounts for drops and whatnot and throwaways and all that stuff. But he hit 30 pass attempts just 3 times in 13 games. And maybe the lack of quarterback depth behind him impacted this and impacted the strategy. But he only had double digit rush attempts 3 times, including, of course, the Ohio State game when he turned around and basically was like, oh, well, I don't have anybody back there that I can hand the football off to that I feel good about. I still think he does unteachable things, and you can build an elite offense around him. And maybe Tennessee will do that, which is, look, that's why he's not lower. I love guys where you feel like, in theory, you should be able to do everything with them, but there's meat on that bone. And I want to acknowledge it instead of assuming that he is right on schedule. I do think that you've got blinders on if you're of the impression that Nico is returning as this top 5 quarterback in the sport. Top 5 upside, I'll have that conversation. That's perfectly fine. But for me, we still need to see more of him to say that he is absolutely in that category going into next season.
Yeah, absolutely. What's so interesting to me about this is, all of the watching of the Tennessee offense I was doing is one of the most perplexing offenses I've ever seen in my life. And it was pretty fundamentally a 1 or 2 read offense. And the question is that because, you know, that's what the offense is? And whenever we saw this with Hendon Hooker, he was able to manipulate it and change things at the line and say, actually, I'm doing this, forget about that. Or like, is that the system? And is he running the system and therefore it's really not working? Or is Josh Heupel seeing something in practice and, to your point, protecting him? And I think this year is going to go a lot to kind of differentiate those two, because and I've just been so wrong about Josh Heupel in Tennessee at literally every point, including last year's playoff. And that's why when I'm wrong about things, I get more interested by them. I'm like, okay, well, I got something to learn here. Kobe said, learning is or losing is exciting because it's learning. And so with him, is it okay? We had Dylan Sampson. We know that you're a little bit gun shy, so we're gonna, run behind him and make you throw the ball when we have to. But I think for this to be, successful at Tennessee, we've said this so many times. And quick side tangent on this, I feel like I keep saying this about offenses. Guys, just go out and lose the dang game. Just let your quarterback throw it 30 times and go see what he's got and move on if he sucks. Like, I don't know why we talked about this with Auburn for like 2 years with Peyton Thorne, where it's like, dude, just go run the dang offense and see if your guy can do it. Doing this halfway, it's like, okay, you've had a year to prepare here. Either you can do it or you cannot. With Amalava, he comes in, he's like this cool guy from the West Coast. He's got the legs, in the Iowa game, he's carving him up. He looks smooth. And then he gets out there in SEC competition. And I mean, I don't know. Bama game was solid. That's more of a Kane Wommack game. He had the Oklahoma game, which even I think looks better in perspective with the defense that Oklahoma had.
But even at the Heupel had to explain afterwards, we dialed it back in the second half. We saw how the game was unfolding, and we felt like this is what we had to do.
Right.
And that seemed noteworthy at the time because we're like, why didn't they let Nico throw it 30, 35 times? Why? And looking back on it, that really wasn't going to be the identity of this team this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, I think that they kind of, I mean, who's to say, right? Because we said this about Milroe on one of the last pods where it's like, what if they had Dylan Sampson getting 15, 20 carries a game and he was averaging 8 yards a carry and Nico was throwing all over the yard and getting the box cleared out? So we could look at it and say, well, that was successful. You beat Alabama. You did all this stuff. So that was the right move. But at the same time, we didn't get to see the other version. So yeah, it's an infinite puzzle. I feel like I could watch 10 Amaliaba games and come away with different opinions, because the times he looks confident, he looks chill. It's not even like he's out there yelling at people. It's like, this game is so easy to me.
Yep.
And then the times where it's not moving, it looks like he has the yips. It's like, I have never played football before. What's going on? And it's like, it's just, I've never seen a guy who does that. So part of that's got to be overthinking. I think he's just overthinking on every play almost towards down the stretch here. So they have a whole offseason with Josh Heupel to figure that out. This offense is really unique. If you're committed to this offense, you're committed to do some things that very few teams ask you to do when it comes to like that veer and shoot, wide receivers running straight, choice routes, so, and that's some of the stuff, not to get into all that, but it's almost like the routes can go different ways and the reads are the same. So I don't know, but we'll see. I think that this is definitely like the last stop for Nico as far as this year. It's like either he is or he isn't, but if he's not, we got to figure something out here.
We went into last year saying that the weapons were undoubtedly a strength, one of the best receiver groups in the SEC. It's going to be a mostly new group of receivers for Nico to work with.
It's going to be a worse group, I think. I think you can pretty roundly see it's going to be a worse group.
I don't know what the Tennessee receivers ended up being because Thornton had his moments where you felt
going into the year, like based on what we expected last year.
Yes, correct.
They disappointed, and only a couple of those guys are still here,
For sure. Yeah, it ended up just being different than I expected, and McCoy didn't end up being I thought McCoy, first part of last year was a much better player, like in 2023, and then down the stretch, some of the big time catches he made in 22. Obviously, the one to set up the field goal against Bama is an all timer, but yeah, and Squirrel White ends up transferring to Florida State. It just doesn't end up being the group that you kind of thought it would be. And this is going to be a really fascinating guy to keep tabs on because all eyes are still going to be on Nico. That's not going to change, even though maybe some of the hype has calmed down a little bit. He's still going to be a national household name in this sport.
Now, right, I love tiers. Would you say a tier break occurs after this?
I'd say Nico is in tier 2 in the SEC, and I'd say this next guy is also in tier 2.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Number 5, Diego Pavia. If you're upset, Tennessee fans, if you're upset that your boy Nico is behind Diego Pavia, ask yourself this. Could Nico have led Vandy to the year that it had this past season in the way that Diego Pavia did? Because I don't believe he could have. Okay? I really don't. That's not to say that Diego Pavia has a higher ceiling. It's not to say he has more ability than Nico. And if you're just looking at this from a standpoint of, I saw those two guys play against one another. Did Vandy's defense have the same defense as Tennessee's defense? Because last I checked, that should probably matter too. Nico, was he playing against Tennessee's defense? No, he wasn't. Again, this is schoolyard drafting. If you're controlling the variables here, you're building a team up. Give me the guy that just did exactly what you would hope a schoolyard drafted quarterback would do at a place like Vandy. Okay. That guy is always going to give you the chance. And I know the flaws. Okay. He's limited with his downfield ability. I fully understand that. But that team played Bama, Tennessee, LSU, Texas. All 4 of those games, and Will, you can attest to this as well. In all 4 of those games, there were moments in which you thought, are we about to lose to Diego Pavia?
We're cooked here. Yeah, earlier you were like, he didn't really air the ball out after Bama. There was one time against LSU that I thought we were pretty cooked against Diego Pavia.
Yeah. As you know, one of those teams did end up losing to Diego Pavia. I love the fact that once he got extra rest before the bowl game, he looked like the best version of himself again, which sort of confirmed what I thought down the stretch the last month of the season, that guy was not fully right, and he was playing through probably several lower body injuries because of the way he has to play to maximize his frame. And look, we don't compare anyone to Johnny Manziel. We do not. Okay. So this is not a Johnny Manziel comp. Okay. I need the record to show not a Johnny Manziel comp. Put it in big lines across the YouTube at the bottom, whatever. I just love that Diego Pavia plays like someone who thinks he's Johnny Manziel. When you're 5'8", trust me, I'm a 5'8" guy. I know a 5'8" guy when I see one. That's the only way he's going to be the best version of himself. If he actually thinks that he is Johnny Manziel reincarnated. I know Johnny Manziel is still alive, but Johnny Manziel, the football player, is dead.
Right.
Vandy is turned because of Pavia. And honestly, I might have disrespected him by only having him at 5.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, man. It's so interesting because he literally just has that dog in him. You know what I'm saying? Like,
epitome of that. Yep.
Literally, like, and going back to Nico, it's like, you got this 5-star guy who's in this like Gothic cathedral of an offense, trying to throw the ball 60 yards at a time. I'm positive Diego Pavia would do terribly in Heupel's offense because of the amount of arm strength required to push the ball down the field. That being said, his ability to move the chains, a la we just talked about Marcel Reed, where it's like, oh, like you're gonna find a way. And I think that in college football specifically, that's what it's about. You know, how many of these plays? I just saw the Ryan Williams play again. That's one of the greatest plays I've seen out of Alabama in the last 20 years. And they used to be Bama was like joyless murder ball. That's what college football usually looks like when you're not amid a dynasty. Is some crazy broken play. I'm talking about the one against Georgia where he caught the ball backwards and took off. That's usually what college football looks like. Kick six, whatever. This is a perfect quarterback for the fourth down play against Alabama. So that being said, schoolyard wise, I like him. I'd probably put him in tier one to say, okay, unless his OC is forcing him to throw the ball 60 yards at a time. And even if they are, he would probably just take off and not care. I think as a leader, I think that's so important. Like we saw that a little bit. I talked about it with Carson Beck, right? Where it's like you don't really have that in you. You don't have the leadership where you have to be humble, but you also have to be a little bit fiery and get your guys going. And that's like the soft skills that we always talk about in the workplace. How fitting that he's getting another year not entering the workplace. But he's, developing that kind of stuff that can be useful in life. And so point being, I think that, as a leader, he might be the best leader of a quarterback that we have on this list. Probably, we can go back and forth, but and that's such a pinnacle thing. So his body, his arm strength, the injuries, all that don't matter as much to me when you're playing at Vanderbilt. Again, this is not a guy, and I mean, look at Stetson Bennett's actually a great example of a guy just like this, where it's like, hey, you know what? That's what it is. He is the diet Stetson Bennett. Where it's like Stetson Bennett was just a winner. He beat out all those 5 stars. He waited his turn, da da da. And those guys can win at a high level, actually, if they're not turnover prone. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see. I would love for him to hear that he's in tier 2 here because I think he'll find a way to squirrel his way into tier 1.
Maybe the only reason he's in tier 2, this is going to contradict what I just said. He might have some system aided benefits of being with Tim Beck, an offensive coordinator that certainly has built that system around him.
Yep.
And maybe he's not as system proof as some of these other guys. Maybe Nico is more system proof, yet at the same time,
in a bad system. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it still was a situation that I don't think you could look at Vandy and all the surrounding pieces, look at what they have on the offensive line, what they have in the backfield, what they have at receiver. Remember Eli Stowers, tight end. Yep. And look at all those pieces and go, oh yeah, they elevated his floor, those surroundings. Oh, that defense, while it was much improved, I don't think we look at that and go, wow, that gave him a leg up on the competition just without him having to do anything. I don't think you can really say that about Diego Pavia and his ability to, as you said, lead and inspire a program that had nothing to be inspired about.
Yeah.
Is a hard thing to do.
De-incentivize sports, really. It's like, not me, buddy. I'm here.
Well, I mean, they incentivize bowling, they incentivize baseball.
Yep. If it's round, they are sound.
Exactly. All right, number 4, Will. Arch Manning, number 4. Arch is going to be part of all these early Heisman conversations. If he starts off all SEC, it won't be stunning, although I think it's worth remembering we usually don't do this unless someone returns as a starter. Even Tua going into 2018 was not an all SEC guy coming into the season, which is kind of crazy to look back on because obviously 2nd and 26 happened when he was not the starter. But I have Arch at 4, and I am super glad that we got the sample size that we got of him this past season. It was kind of perfect, and especially perfect for Texas. He gets multiple games as a starter, albeit against less competition. And down the stretch, he played in each of Texas's last 4 games in key 4th down spots. That included, of course, the 4th quarter touchdown run that he had at Texas A&M. Arch had 13 touchdowns on 232 snaps played, some of which were more significant than others, for sure. But a 47.2 adjusted completion percentage on throws 20 yards downfield. Also completed 88% of his passes that were 9 yards or less from the line of scrimmage. We know that Sark is going to want to still operate like that, even though that was a little bit more prominence with Ewers and maybe some of his limitations. But I think he has to improve in the intermediate range. I think that's clear if you look at some of the numbers, you look at the way that he goes through progressions. Maybe the fact that he wasn't a one-read guy in some ways kind of hurt him in those spots. He definitely seems to be one of those guys that wants to be able to work left to right, wants to have a true feel for the offense and know what he's seeing out there. We also only saw him have 16 passes while facing pressure. So I don't want to assume that this is this guy that's going to always stare down the barrel of the gun and like that's just some box that he's checked. I praise Gunnar Stockton for being able to do that in that game against Notre Dame, but you still had moments where you saw the mental clock still not fully there. Same thing with Arch. I think you can do whatever you want with him. And that's what's so intriguing. And if you're not paying attention, or if you're just assuming it's his last name, it's his last name, go watch him. Okay. Just go watch Arch play football and tell me where the obvious, overrated, overhyped stuff is coming from. Okay. Because all of it is there. It's not a finished product. And that's why he's number 4, not number 1 on this list. But I do think that everything is on the table and he is going to be set up for success. And the limited sample size that we got of him this year doesn't have me backing off of my belief that he can become maybe the best quarterback in college football.
You know what's interesting about this? I feel like I've come absolutely full circle. And you know me, I'm a last name hater. I was joking about Marvin Harrison Jr. for an entire year, and I feel
Yeah, you
very
were.
vindicated after BTJ is way better than him too. And so like I am not a who's your daddy, who's your whatever, but you know, if a quarterback who had his measurables appeared and his last name was Smith, and we just watched that guy play, I would be in. And
I
and
would be
now,
in too, Will. I'd be in. I
yeah,
know I'd be in. Yes.
that's kind of my thing. Is it's like, maybe you could do a little bit of the Will Levis thing where you're like, like this guy, maybe he's got that dog in him. He's a little bit bigger. He can push the pile. He can move with his legs. But when you look at the fact that he was a 5-star recruit, now we start to go, okay, he's not some random guy from Plano, Texas, or wherever. He is take out the last name. He is a 5-star quarterback. Okay, and spoiler alert here. Don't mean to jump ahead, but I would actually take him over DJ Lagway, and I'll tell you why. It's the fact of his mobility and the toughness he's shown. And DJ Lagway played injured. I'm not saying he's soft or anything, but the way usually when you see these guys, from these families and stuff, it's very like, oh, the Manning has arrived. He's here. Just it's time for the Manning to play quarterback, guys. And we've seen that with some of the guys who they were second or third generation guys, and they expect a certain treatment coming him. For him, he was getting put in 4th down runs and getting the stew knocked out of him, and just getting up like, huh? All right, I'm gonna go walk over to the sidelines. And I think that not just the toughness, but the mobility. You know what I'm talking about? Obviously, we think about Peyton and Eli with him. And those guys, by the way, two completely opposite ends of the risk spectrum. That's us right there, Peyton and Eli. He is obviously from the Cooper side, where it's a little bit more the athleticism. So it's such a mystery box because it's like, okay, we haven't really seen that other than his granddad with the mobility. And I don't know if his granddad would be considered mobile today, right? Maybe a little bit of the Diego Pavia build, right? So point being, to have the tools, to have the toughness, to have the brain that has been studying football since he was a kid. And I wasn't blown away by his high school tape, like following Louisiana football and all that. I was like, this guy seems a little bit overrated as a high school recruit. So after watching him for a year, like I was ready to be a hater, and he kind of converted me in limited sample size. I'm really excited for Texas, especially coming in after Quinn Ewers, who didn't in his final year, like we talked about, live up to the billing of the recruiting ranking. This is a guy that the way he walks, the way he carries himself, the way that he has been in these high leverage situations as a freshman, I just couldn't be more impressed. And I'm excited to see that with, I hate to say it again, the surroundings with Sark, because I think that they will find ways to get him involved, and they've already proven they're not treating him like some precious breakable asset.
There could be some moments, and I think there were already moments this season when we saw the side by side with Arch and Ewers, in which we all looked at it and went, he can do the things that Ewers can't. And
Right.
that's what fueled so much of the discussion, not just the last name, but
Mm-hmm.
you could really benefit from having a mobile quarterback in this spot. You could really benefit from having a quarterback that we absolutely know can stretch the field. There are still some things that will come with reps, and that's why, in my opinion, he's not even higher on this list. That I think the 3 guys ahead of him have shown with more reps against real, legitimate, respected SEC competition, and it's hard for me to kind of get there with those guys. I still think that he's going to be so fun. He's going to be really, really fun to watch. And again, I try not to bring up the Sark element because that is one of those unfair advantages within my theoretical schoolyard game. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have Steve Sarkisian calling plays. I'm
Right.
not I'm not sitting there knowing that he's my elite offensive mind or knowing that that Texas defense is going to make it so that I don't know how many games that he's going to have more than 24 points. And that's
Yeah.
really beneficial. And it's going to make every one of those big time plays feel better. And we're maybe not going to focus in as much on the mistakes. And he gets that grace. And that's the good news for Arch. So I don't want to factor that into that equation with him. But I just think that a guy that has shown that he can make all of these big time throws already while doing so as a guy who trusts himself as a runner, is not running out of desperation, but seems to like that element of the game, I think is going to make for a fascinating chapter at Texas with what this offense is going to look like this upcoming season.
And you know what too, just on the Sark part of it, I'm not even talking about looking and having Sark going forward. I'm talking about the leverage situations that Sark put him in. It reminds me of like a Tim Tebow or like a Ryan Perrilloux at LSU, where it was like,
Mm.
oh wait, I see, like I see it. I see it in small sample size. When you would say, I don't pretend to remember like Tim Tebow back in like, you know, 05, 06, whatever, but like I can imagine seeing this guy coming out of Jacksonville, seeing the rave reviews, and then seeing him check into the game, and he's like covered in sweat and blood, like Tim Tebow always pushing the pile. It's like, oh wow, this guy actually is what we signed up for, and that's the feeling I got with Arch because of the leverages, because of the responsibility he was given with the incumbent starter.
I texted Van Lathan after he did the podcast on the rewatchables on the replacements, and I said, "You realize that Ryan Perrilloux is Shane Falco?" That's a comp that we'll have to get into another time.
Oh man, talking about some dudes, I loved
Oh,
Fairlew, man. Anyway,
Fairleigh was great. All right, Lenora Sellers is not who I have at number 3. Will for a moment I considered Sellers at 1, and you know what? I'm not going to necessarily talk someone out of Sellers at 1. Okay, I'm not. I love what he became.
I
I've
will.
talked. You got Sellers at 1. Okay,
No, no, no.
so
I said I'll talk to the Adam Sellers at
oh,
one.
okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I respect your unbiased opinion on that. I have been really impressed by his obvious strength of escaping pressure and not just trying to extend drives with his legs, but keeping his eyes downfield and hitting someone in stride. Doing all of those things within a given play is special. It really is. And once he stayed healthy and was getting those reps week in, week out, you saw that skill set come out. You saw that come out maybe with more confidence when early on it felt like he was a lock to take 5 sacks in a given game, and he got away from that. That group did not have an elite offensive line and had one of the worst groups of receivers in the SEC. And yet Sellers, all he did was lead that team to 6 wins in a row to end the regular season, 4 of which were against AP top 25 teams. I thought he should have been an all SEC quarterback, which ends up going to Quinn Ewers. I'll agree to disagree with that. He should have been the first all SEC quarterback in South Carolina history. That's right. Haven't had an all SEC quarterback at season's end ever, not even
Yep.
Connor Shaw. The only thing that we need to see with Sellers, the only box for me that needs to be checked still is the intermediate passing game. We're talking 10 to 19 yards, 57.8% adjusted completion percentage on those throws, 10 to 19 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. That was 11th in the SEC. That would give your offense more consistency so that you don't necessarily need those jaw dropping plays to be able to move the chains. But if you watch Sellers, I promise you, you can't help but love the dude, unless you're a Clemson fan, in which case you're probably, giving him an F of a middle name and, cursing that final play in which he broke roughly 35 tackles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm he's interesting, man. And I will go, as I say, I would push back against it. I'm gonna just quickly give you my top 5. I would say Nuss at 1, Arch at 2, Lagway at 3, and then I would go Sellers Pavia. That's the end of my tier 1 break.
Okay.
So I think, just to be clear, like I'm not like, oh, like, it's here's the thing about Sellers, okay? And I'm only saying this as a correction to the mean. That offense, it was just so hard to figure out last year watching it. Okay, I talk about the Gothic Cathedral for Tennessee. This was almost like a Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Like you would watch things moving around, and you'd be like, "What is going to happen here?" They would just pop out a perfect little piece of candy sometimes, and you would be like, "Huh, how did that happen?" And then sometimes you're like, "Oh, there's an Oompa Loompa on fire in the background. This is never going to work." And so, point
Nick
being,
Carver actually caught a downfield pass. How did that happen? Where did that
right,
come from?
right, and like you could see the pieces in this offense and be like, "Wow, this could be really scary." And then for like the Texas A&M game, you go, "Oh my God, what is going on here?" We got like Simon, we got all these guys. So point being, I will give him lots of credit for figuring that out. Okay, like genuinely, I think that some of the concepts that I saw, even like the Bama game, like where I'm like, oh man, if you just knew this offense a little bit better, if you had some continuity. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen next year, but so I'm not going to hold that against him. Is where I'm going. I'm going to only give him credit for last year because you're coming from a quarterback in Spencer Rattler, who is, say what you will about Spencer Rattler, a processor of football. I'm not going to say exactly a football genius,
He's
but
played a lot of football.
he's like a pro, like, he elevated that offense in a completely different way, and they retooled it for Sellers, right? And so, point being, I think that once I saw that offense work, I went, "Oh gosh, this was so much to learn." I mean, congratulations! You go look at the Clemson game, and it still didn't exactly work, but he made it work. So that gives me a very high floor for this player because I know he's hard to tackle. I know he's athletic. I know that he can make things happen with his legs, and he can make, I'm going to say, 80% of the throws. Making all the throws is not really something that happened in college football, right? And so, that being said, because that offense was so interesting, I just don't like, I would assume he would do better in like a, I don't know, like a standard Mike Bobo offense where he was just looking at receivers who were supposed to be open. But I don't exactly know because it's almost like our guy Mateer coming in, right? Where it's like, well, how in a schoolyard situation, you're not going to run an offense that looks anything like the one that he was successful in. And that might be credit to him. So that being said, I like him a lot. I think that as far as being the leader of your team, as far as moving the ball, knowing the playbook, like we talked about, trusting yourself, I think he can do all of that. I think that it's all about how you play with expectation. It's all about how you play with a target on your back. I think now we're starting to enter the tier of the guys who have that type of expectation. I think, what would you say? I know this is very early in the offseason. What do you think the expectation for South Carolina is next year?
South Carolina's going to start off potentially in the top 10 or as a team just on the outside of the top 10. And there will be questions asked similar to the questions we asked about Mizzou of you've got the returning starting quarterback that you've wanted. You feel like you've got your offensive identity that you could have hoped for. And in
Mm-hmm.
this era with the 12-team playoff, you feel like you have a chance. And that's exciting. That is super, super exciting. You have a guy that's going to be really difficult to prepare for, but got to stay healthy. Has to stay healthy. I wonder too
Mm-hmm.
how much the addition of Aaron Nolan coming over from Ohio State, a guy that's just an all-name team legend who entered a situation where he looked up and realized, oh crap, Julian Sayin is in my same exact class,
Yep.
and I'm not going to beat that guy out, and I'm going to find a different path. And I wonder how much that addition, which I bet South Carolina spent a good amount to be able to bring him on board, how much of that was so that they could run the full arsenal of the Lenore Sellers offense and make it so that they don't have to worry about running him 15 times in a given game and
Mm-hmm.
know that you have someone that's still going to be a little bit more of a work in progress and Nolan's going to obviously need more reps to feel comfortable, but to feel like you have that guy behind him to where it's not going to be a total liability. With all due respect to Robbie Ashford, I we saw a significant difference in those two quarterbacks, and Sellers just a more talented player. I mean, he's just more talented overall, and he could do everything you asked of in the offense. And I wonder how important that will be in allowing us to see Sellers take that next step and see him put it together for an entire season, and maybe give South Carolina that much tougher of an offense to be able to prepare to defend.
Yeah, and honestly, the Ashford part of it is underrated here because that was a guy who came from legendary high school program Hoover, right? Who had played at all these different other like big programs. And if Sellers had struggled, mightily in the early part of the season, that's a guy who already has SEC experience, and it was just never a discussion because of how different the offense looked. To your point, against LSU in that second half, look fine against Akron, right? But they knew Sellers was the guy, even with a guy like that in the building. So yeah, I'll just put a bow on it here. It all comes with expectations. Now we're getting into that group of guys, right? So I want to be consistent here. Um, Arch Manning is going to be competing for a national championship or is a failure. Garrett Nussmeier will be competing for a national championship if it is a failure. DJ Lagway, I think that Florida fans would tell you that after last year, they probably have a little bit higher expectations than 8-9 win. Maybe with him on board, they can do a little bit more. But the thing about Lagway is he already had to win with that target on his back, right? Like we talked about it at the time, the famous me being like, I don't know, man, South Carolina's really good. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Lagway, when he came in, it mattered. From the jump, it mattered. Every start, every pass he threw. So I give him lots of credit there. So even though, like, you could kind of argue those guys' body of work, it's full season for Sellers, but every game being pretty much a must-win game for Lagway. So, like, just you're being compared to the best quarterbacks in the SEC, which is a great place to be. And I think he will finish, to your point, if things go according to plan, he'll finish up there in that All SEC team. But if they don't, he could be a guy who finishes around 8 or 10, you know?
Yeah. Let's talk about that guy that you just brought up, Lagway, because I have met too.
Mhm.
Even after a mistake-filled bowl game, I love me some DJ Lagway. And there are still
Yep.
moments in that game in which I
Marco
thought
Rubio's son scored. That bowl game didn't matter.
that bowl game was weird. It was very, very weird.
Yeah.
The sample size down the stretch was everything that Florida fans could have hoped for. And that was with him dealing with the hamstring injury. You knew that they weren't going to want to run him. And yet Florida wins 4 games to close the season, 3 of which were against teams that won at least 9 games. And by the way, all 3 of those teams had playoff hopes in the latter half of the season. It's kind of a crazy LSU, Ole Miss, even
You
Tulane.
kept telling me that. And I kept saying, buddy, not this team.
Not you, but there was still at least some sort of
They had hope. I didn't for them.
Yeah. Like with Sellers, with Lagway, the ability to escape pressure and keep his eyes downfield, it's already next level. That part is just there. Some of the things that if you just want to spend 3-4 minutes on Lagway doing that in his football career, you can probably make those videos already with his college and high school sample size of just those specific plays. And you'll go, I know you can't teach that. You just cannot. And that is truly special. And we know that the deep ball it's a thing of beauty. It really is. It is so natural. You can have him throwing off of the wrong foot, stepping up into pressure, and still every single time he unleashes it, I just expect it's going to drop in a bucket.
Yep.
And
Apparatus on the leg, acoustic rocky top pouring down on top of him. Don't matter.
Doesn't matter. He'll find a way, and it'll just be one of the prettiest throws that you'll see over the course of a given Saturday. And you'll think to yourself, how what? That should be impossible. That shouldn't be allowed. This kid is a true freshman that's doing that. And there's a reason why so many people, myself included, are already giddy about that. And it's not just the highlight reel plays, because look, let's be honest here. Anthony Richardson could give you a highlight. Anthony Richardson could give you those plays that made you think this is God playing football. DJ Lagway is already better than Anthony Richardson ever was. Okay. And it's not even an argument. The things that he does within a given game to recognize, hey, I've got this guy open in the intermediate. Hey, I know I can be able to make this play with my legs to be able to extend a drive. These are the things that he is already doing at an elite level and beating teams that matter. Okay. PFF had him with the highest big time throw percentage on 20-yard throws of anybody in the country. 15 of his 36 passes.
That lines up with the reality that I experienced.
Right?
Watching him play football.
How many times did you watch DJ Lagway and go, that was a big time throw? Say what you will about PFF and all the different metrics and stuff and the way that they view things, but guy made a lot of big time throws. Everything with your eyes told you that that's what he did. 15 of those 36 passes, big time throws. So not just completions, but like tight window, clutch throws. And that's the beauty of Lagway. Get this. When he attempted a 20-yard pass, no quarterback in America had a better average yards per attempt, 20.4 yards per attempt. I mean, that is insane. The guy had 12 completions of 40 yards. That was 4th in the SEC for a guy who started less than half the games. What, he starts 6 games this past season? He's not perfect yet. We saw against an elite defensive mind in John Summerall in the bowl game, there are still things that you can do that can trick him, that make him think he's seeing one thing pre-snap and he's actually not. You need to be able to improve those things if you're going to take Florida to the places that it wants to go, if you're going to be an all-SEC, all-American type guy, all the things that we think are on the table for this dude. But I'd have no problem building my team around DJ Lagway and letting anybody take the field. I'd be perfectly fine with that. The schedule is still going to be really difficult, and I'm not factoring that into whether or not he can win a Heisman Trophy. Okay, like that's not what we're talking about here today. But I just think that guy is super elite already, even though the sample size is not even a full season's worth of football against SEC competition.
You know, man, I'm sitting here and like you're talking about Anthony Richardson. That feels like it happened lifetimes ago. Billy Napier is at the funniest group of quarterbacks, maybe of any coach ever. I know guys coach for like 40 years, but if you really go through year by year and look at the quarterbacks of this guy's roster that he had, almost getting Rashada, having Kitna, starting with Anthony Richardson, having all like the Yale gentleman that we saw, like every quarterback that he had has been some wild, whimsical adventure. And so, actually, I guess I have to credit Billy Napier now that I think about all these weird quarterbacks. Yeah, he was the guy that like brought them in. Graham Mertz, obviously, I forgot about him because he's the most normal guy, but that's a guy that we've been watching forever, and it was a Big Ten guy. We didn't used to obviously see that. So Ricky Stanzi showed up at the door one day, and now he's your quarterback. Like all of this is very funny stuff. And so, point being, the fact that this child gave them consistency for the first time, and I never bought the merch stuff to be honest because I saw how limited he was. But looking at Lagway, I think that a good measure of a quarterback, when it comes to the defense, is how scared are you when that guy drops back to pass, right? You look at Pat Mahomes, every time that guy catches a snap, it's like, you better be on your receiver because he will teleport the ball into their hands. Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels is like, well, you better be gap sound, you better have your D-line on because they will take off and be down 50 yards and your whole defense is going to look silly. Same thing with Lagway. On third down, it was like, dear God, please don't be in single coverage. Whatever you do, do not be in single coverage because this guy will uncork like a trebuchet and the ball will just go and you go and go and go. And you're just going, I hope that's not Major Burns out there. I hope it's not because that ball's still in the air. It's been in the air for 5 seconds. Where's it going to land? And it's just right in the bucket. And so, yeah, I think that, we have to. It is not really, to me, possible to grade a half season as one of the greatest freshman QB seasons. But that being said, the amount, like we talked about, pressure of situations that he was in, and to still confidently just sling it the way he did. Yeah, again, you got to hold him to the standard of this is a guy who, hey, missed his high school prom or whatever. Like he looked uncomfortable at times, but that's because he was a child, and those people should really never be starting SEC football games no matter what, unless something has gone horribly wrong, like it did for Florida, right? And so, you don't have Montreal Johnson. You don't have Graham Mertz, the two guys you were excited about. You got random receivers running around.
Don't have Trey Wilson, by the way, too, who was supposed to be your best receiver coming into this season.
Yeah.
He ends up not being available down the stretch as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you have nothing, so you might as well give this kid a shot. So, yeah, I think that I'm going to take all the criticism of him with a grain of salt and say he's only going to get better from here. I don't think I missed any major like Florida transfer portal news, but I'm still a little bit suspect of that, like where these receivers are going to come from. Just because again, who doesn't want to come?
Still need to add more guys. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, like and we heard this actually with the Commanders that like receivers are like kind of declaring like, hey, I want to go play with the Commanders. This looks like a fun offense. And it's like in the portal, you're gonna get discounts for receivers and weapons that know if they can get open, he's gonna put the ball where it needs to be. So maybe they have some plan like in the works. Maybe it's whatever. You gotta have something. Like it can't. Again, we saw it with year one, chaos, nothing around him. Give him something. I want to watch this guy. Like I'm openly rooting for Florida to get receivers in the transfer portal. This guy is so fun.
I am fascinated with the post-spring receiver market. I think it's going to be significant. I thought it would be more significant last year. Still ended up getting good players out of the post-spring market, and there have been at least one of those significant impact guys post-spring window, Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams, somebody that we'll talk about with Jim Dunaway. And then, even if you want to say Keandre Lambert-Smith had a huge impact on this college football season. Because he was really good for Auburn, but because Penn State, if it had him on the roster, maybe it goes to a national championship this year. Instead of having 0 receivers get a catch in the semifinal game. But yeah, it is going to be interesting to see what they can do around him. And maybe that's what gives me even more confidence to think, man, look at the limitations that it felt like Lagway kind of had and facing what Florida was facing down the stretch. And he still looked as good as he did and still just passed that eye test and looked like he had been playing this game in the SEC for 2 or 3 years already. To me, it's going to be one of those guys that we're going to be talking about on a weekly basis. So this will obviously not be the last Lagway conversation of the offseason.
For sure.
Let's go to one, Will. I know you just couldn't wait. You're like, Connor, just skip ahead to one. I know where you're going with this.
No, this is good stuff. I love a good, like again, the tiers, seeing where guys shake out. I love this stuff.
I got Garrett Nussmeier 1.
Mm-hmm.
Long live the gunslinger. He can actually get more accurate on downfield throws too. There's still room for improvement there. There is. And I thought there were moments this year, and not just with mistimed jumps that resulted in Brian Kelly meltdowns on the sideline in the swamp, but I thought there were moments this year in which they probably could have hit on more of those deep shots. And I still came away from this season going, man, I'm okay with him making mistakes if it yields the positives that it does. I can live with 1 interception every 44 passes like he had this past year, because the amount of NFL throws and the amount of tight window throws, big time throws, however you want to quantify it, it's off the charts. It is. And while he definitely had that early November lull this past year, and it's probably the reason that he returned to school, because if he had continued on that trajectory, it probably would have been too hard for him to turn down the NFL money that could have been coming his way, even with one season as a starter. I still look at this past season and go, he looks like a well seasoned quarterback who can pick anybody apart. You're giving me a 2-minute drive, I'll take Nuss. You're telling me I need 40 points to win a shootout because my defense is down 5 starters, I'll take Nuss. You're giving me one guy to make a throw into a window that's so small that Brian Kelly can't even fit his fist through it, I'll take Nuss.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
that's great. Sorry.
that's like I would take him in all of those spots over all of those guys on this list. And even though the running ability is not there like it is guys really 2 through 7 on my list, I think
Mhm.
it probably stopped Austin Simmons. We haven't really seen what it looks like with him as a runner, but that's kind of where I would stop. Everybody else 2 through 7, I would say has that running ability.
Is
Uh,
Lagway mobile? I didn't think Lagway was like mobile.
I think Lagway is going to be more mobile than what he showed down the stretch with the
God, he had
hamstring
an
injury.
apparatus on. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point. It's like, anyway.
But yeah, I don't know that we'll end up saying like he's, top 3 in the SEC in rushing or something like that. But Nussmeier is going to be, and we got to come up with a term for this. He's going to be a negative rushing yards guy at season's end,
Yeah.
right? Like some of those guys are just going to be that because sacks obviously count against them. And I don't think Lagway will quite end up being that. But yeah, look, I just think that if you are still able to be that efficient, you can overcome that and you can make a defense just feel like it is helpless over the course of 60 minutes. I think Nuss gives you the best chance in a given week to be able to do that. And that's why he's number 1 on my list.
The amount of responsibility that was put on him, I genuinely don't know if I've seen it in college before. We could talk about this season that he just had, which is like arguably like the third greatest season by an LSU passer ever, and the other two names have been recent. And you look at what Burrow and Jaden Daniels, the positions they were put in, and Jaden Daniels was put in a bad position by his defense in ways that, I mean, Nuss definitely wasn't, but he had 2 first-round receivers, right? I'm so glad Lacey is not coming back. The receivers that are going to be here
Do we
next
want to
year,
have that conversation, Will?
I never liked like that's the thing is that he was not an LSU number 1 receiver, and that was one of the reasons why the offense struggled because Nussmeier was out here. I mean, this is a guy who attempted almost 100 more passes than anyone else in the SEC. His offensive line was not any good. Weird year for Brian Kelly. I just never had a bad offensive line, but he did with Nussmeier. And so point being, like the running backs weren't really good, the receivers weren't really good.
His
You had
tackles
it.
were good. His tackles were really good, though.
His tackles were good, but in terms of what he needs with that interior of the offensive line, with an immobile quarterback, I would almost rather have a better interior because the inside pressure flusters an immobile quarterback so much. Because
Fair point.
coming out of that A gap, if you see that guy immediately, you start freaking out. Whereas blindside hits are bad, but if you look at his sacks, most of them were like that, where the guy came straight through and blew him up, and fumbles, like bad sacks, right? Because he would watch it and he just couldn't do anything. And so, point being, it was a weird year, obviously, and I think that and again, Mike Denbrock, I owe you an apology. I was not familiar with your game. The way that LSU was able to succeed in spite of all of that with this weird game planning and all that is crazy. And you could look at the bad passes for sure, man. And there was a joke these weird Twitter threads that we see now. I saw one that was like, "Oh, these German scientists, they fixed Jaden Daniels in college. They had this VR technology, and he was able to simulate games while he had it was hurt and all this different stuff, and that's what made him so accurate." And I shared that in the chat, and I was like, so I think Nuss was just watching SpongeBob on this before that A&M game, huh? And so there was just moments where I'm like, Nuss, what are you doing to us? But at the same time, when you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, when you have this fan base, when everybody hates Brian Kelly, when you're on the road in the SEC, and it's all up to you. Yeah, you could label him as this decision, like guy who makes bad decisions. And yeah, he tied for the SEC lead in interceptions with 12. But also, Beck, viewers, those guys kind of they had better teams around them. I think it's very easy to say, and they had less
He didn't throw as much
responsibility.
either. I mean, Beck threw a lot too. Beck definitely threw a
Beck
lot.
was second, but it was still 100 attempts. So
Yeah.
you could look at the extra games, but I'm here to look at the attempts going, this is a guy who was a gunslinger. It was a guy who threw these bad passes, and there were some for sure. But that's not the type of quarterback you want to give this level of control to usually. It's kind of like a Brett Favre style quarterback, which those are so freaking rare now. He's kind of the only one that I've seen in a minute. Maybe early Josh Allen. Anyway, so point being, Yeah, I'm so fascinated by that. And again, he's a great leader. He's not somebody who's going to move the ball with his legs, so he's going to have to hit on time in the flow of this offense. I'm so interested by him. I told you throughout the year that he was going to be a guy who probably about fourth or fifth quarterback coming off the board, and he'd end up with a smart team like the Steelers or something, and he would just end up being the next Big Ben. On the field. And he, I was like, this is a guy whose dad is obviously a coach. He is a learner and an understander of football. And even if he makes those mistakes, it's because he trusts himself too much. And I would take that every time over a guy like Nico, who is scared to throw the ball on my team where I'm trying to win the game at the end, because you're going to have something like the Ole Miss game at the end of the game where it's like, you know what, buddy, I'm putting this right where it needs to be. And I think that's the story of Nussmeier. Being an LSU quarterback these days is a pretty big mantle. And I think that LSU finally, in my mind, has expectations going into this next year. He finally has the weapons around him that can make it happen. This should be a beautiful offense. And if it's not, it's going to pretty roundly be his fault, because LSU has done everything in the transfer portal and to hire coaches that should support him.
I believe he deserves to start at 1.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he will end up at 1 when I'm looking back on the season and saying these were the 5, these were the 10 best quarterbacks in the SEC. I don't think he finishes there,
Mm-hmm.
because I still believe in the hype of Lagway, which
Mm-hmm.
call it the hype. Maybe Arch finishes in that 1 spot,
Mm-hmm.
but if I'm just talking about a guy week 1, start of the season, like who's ready to play this game at a high level, who's ready to go out there and ball, and who knows, maybe after week 1, maybe we see Arch light up Ohio State's defense in
Mm-hmm.
Columbus, and we're going, he's already won. Maybe that's gonna happen. Who knows? Okay, so I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to rule that out, but the
Wow.
guy,
What about Dabo? Two-time national champion. Okay.
yeah, but new defensive coordinator at Clemson.
We're
Tom
already making
Allen's Tom
excuses. Look
Allen's
at
elite.
this. All
Tom Allen's
right.
elite.
We
I know
love Tom
that.
Allen.
But some new defensive pieces there after that unit really struggled down the stretch. So maybe a few more questions on that side of the ball. New defensive coordinator at Ohio State as well after Jim Knowles
Yeah.
leaves for Penn State. So those are all connected. But yeah, there are just going to be moments next year in which we are going, man, Nuss is feeling it, and there's nothing an opposing team can do about it. And I have more confidence in him being that guy, at least at the start of the season, than anybody else on this list, even if it does come with those mistakes. Everybody on this list is going to make some of those mistakes, maybe with the exception of like a Diego Pavia, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of been the least mistake prone guy among these quarterbacks. And we point out that that comes with, some drawbacks, and there's some limitations to the type of offense that you feel like you can run. But I'll take the good with the bad with him. I'll take the good with the bad with Lagway and Sellers and Arch and all of these guys too, man, because it's going to be a really good group of quarterbacks in this conference, and that's part of the reason why I don't feel like it should be doom and gloom in the SEC going into next season. And this prediction that, oh my God, it's no longer the SEC's world, and everybody else is just living in it. The SEC should have the best group of quarterbacks going into next season. And maybe we'll have time to do like a conference by conference breakdown, but I still would feel best about that than, than any other position. If you could be elite at quarterback, your team, I guess your conference in this case, is going to be able to have a chance.
Yeah, and I think it is so fascinating because we've talked about the group of quarterbacks coming back as far as like going into last season, and all of them kind of pretty roundly like fell on their faces. I mean, Ewers ended up in that second team spot. I think Dart had a pretty good year, but some of those losses is pretty inexcusable. I think Nussmeier is one of the few that played above expectations. I think to your point, Ewers finishing second team All SEC. To me, I would much rather have Nussmeier, especially given like arm strength, health, all that. But point being, and also there were times during that November slump where I saw even LSU fans kind of turning on him, which goes to show that LSU fans will just hate whoever their quarterback is. I saw it with Mettenberger. I saw it with Jaden Daniels. I thought that when guys wanted Jaden Daniels to step back for Nussmeier, there was something deeper going on there. I think this fan base just hates their quarterback sometimes, because if you watch
Who
Nussmeier
doesn't?
play, right, like that's the other thing. It's not specific to LSU. It's just like, you guys know we got some special guys in this room. So point being, that's why Walker Howard's no longer there, because Nussmeier was in the room, right? Like that's why everybody meme that, but I'd much rather have Nussmeier. So point being, like when you would watch this guy, and I'm sure you'll do film review going into next year, it's just the fact of like watching a guy fight and claw, kind of like Diego Pavia in that. Yeah, again, Daniels, amazing, just to compare these guys, but it was like fighting uphill in the ways that both Burrow and Daniels have all NFL receivers. Nussmeier didn't have that, and so if you watch the way he plays, it's like he's struggling, laboring. He's like an engine with everything moving around him. And again, so rare in college, so rare to be the archetype he is. So yeah, I'm fascinated by him this year because, and I say this to put a bow on it, all those quarterbacks coming back last year, I think they almost kind of. This is overgeneralization, but I would say the common theme of why a lot of these guys struggled was a little bit of self-aggrandizing, a little bit of smelling your own farts. When you look at Beck, you look at some of the guys that just didn't play the way we thought they would. And with Nussmeier, this would be his year for that. If he were to struggle,
Yeah,
coming into this year, he's the number one player. So I
it's
do want
hard.
to, put a pin in that. Where hey, I love Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels going into their Heisman seasons, and I was vindicated. But it's been a pretty long time. I don't know if it's been really ever that an LSU quarterback has been number one on the list. And furthermore, it's been a very long time, to your point, where the incumbent guy has actually finished the year as the first team.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's a unfair thing to say at all, because if you go look at the preseason and the postseason all SEC teams, it's a lot of shuffling.
It is definitely at the quarterback spot. Harder than ever to be that person. Comes back. It's the big NIL deal,
Mm-hmm.
private jet deal. Get that announcement from Gary Nussmeier at some point soon. And all of a sudden, yeah, it is more difficult than ever, I think, to come back and be that dude. So here's what the rankings shake out to look like. The way too early ranking, subject to change, of course. 10, Taylon Green. 9, Gunnar Stockton. 8, Austin Simmons. 7, Marcel Reed. 6, Nico Iamaleava. 5, Diego Pavia. 4, Arch Manning. 3, Lenore Sellers. 2, DJ Lagway. And 1, Garrett Nussmeier. That's the list. Get my mentions. I don't care. They're way too early rankings. They can
Yeah.
change. That's fine. All right, let's kick it to Jim Dunaway. And I brought Jim into this discussion because I realize I've been pretty down on all things Bama this offseason. And I know that Jim, while he gets labeled as being like the Bama homer, I still think that Jim has just such great perspective and knows that
Mm-hmm.
program as well as anybody. So if there was somebody that was going to kind of set me straight on some of these things, it was going to be him. So great perspective from him as always. Here is Jim Dunaway. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the legend, Jim Dunaway. Uh, Jim, let me start with an apology. I did not mean to leave your beloved Tampa Bay Bucks in such awkward fashion. All I ask is that you appreciate the year that we had together and not remember me for my exit. An Irish exit, it's what we do. We're not good at it, and that's why they coined an entire phrase for our group of people.
Yes, yes, my friend Liam O'Gara. It was a good run. It was a good year. Having Liam Cohen there calling for Baker Mayfield. Apparently, the Buccaneers are so bad that whomever the offensive coordinator is that gets them back to another division championship, they immediately get the head coaching job somewhere else in the South. Buccaneers to Panthers, Buccaneers to Jags now. So whoever takes this job next, I'm sure is going to be a head coach somewhere else next year after Baker and Mike Evans make the playoffs again in Tampa.
It's a stepping stone job. It's just like Bama offensive coordinator once upon a time, something like Bama defensive coordinator.
Yes.
Let's talk some Bama. I didn't have Bama in my way too early top 10, and maybe I'm in the minority with that opinion, but I feel like I have more questions than I thought I would have heading into year 2 of the DeBoer era, and I found myself defending him more times than not entering this season, but kind of looking at everything moving forward and what I feel confident about with Bama, it's just a little bit different. Um, Here's an obvious question that I've been wondering about just for like the past 2 weeks. Why hasn't the DeBoer Grubb reunion happened yet, and what are we waiting for?
Well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First off, I would imagine, I don't know his contractual situation with the Seahawks. But with him being dismissed there, I don't know if he has another year or two of payments. Maybe there's no rush for him to get back into coaching. But also there's a small window of recruiting that is going on. If you'll remember when Ryan Grubb was in Tuscaloosa for a short period of time, he did not leave until a couple of days after the February signing day, which is coming up here very quickly in February. He actually was there at the zone on National Signing Day. I was there. I actually recorded him standing up. I'm Ryan Grubb. I'll be your offensive coordinator with all the other assistant coaches. 2 days later, he's back in Seattle. So there could be a little of that of the timing. Could be trying to work things out Does he want to coach right now? Is he so burned by the 1 year in the NFL that he's still trying to figure it out? I do believe at some point Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer will be back together again. Could it be this year? It could be. What do you do with Nick Sheridan? Nick Sheridan, very much, I think he was already going to be on the coaching staff in Tuscaloosa when Ryan Grubb was the offensive coordinator. I think he could hang around as a co-offensive coordinator or the offensive coordinator, and Ryan Grubb could be, the assistant head coach. I don't know how it all works out, but I know there's no limitations anymore to on the field coaching, and I still am waiting to see Ryan Grubb in Tuscaloosa. It's not going to surprise me if he ends up there at some point, but it's not a rush yet. I wait until that National Signing Day period, which is sort of a year ago with his exit. A year later could be the time he returns shortly around or right after National Signing Day, if he's going to come back.
It's a good point. It's worth remembering. If it doesn't happen, though, and I don't have this officially, you would be a better resource to be able to have this. But if Ryan Grubb is pursued and ultimately not hired by Alabama, he's got to be the first person to ever turn down that program in 3 consecutive years, unless I'm forgetting somebody.
Yeah, it's very biblical would be to turn down Alabama thrice, 3 times. If he does not come back, I don't know if he's been offered, so that would be the conversation. Did they offer it to him again a third time? But for those that don't know, Nick Saban wanted him for his final year, and he did not want to come and leave Kalen DeBoer. He stayed in Washington and played for a national championship. DeBoer wanted him to make the transition. He stayed in Seattle, didn't have to change homes, and coached the Seattle Seahawks. He is a great play caller, especially when he's teamed with Kalen DeBoer. But also, they had 3 NFL wide receivers and an NFL quarterback on that Washington team when Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer's offense looked best, and probably only had one NFL wide receiver last year. And we'll wait and see about Bernard, and we'll wait and see about Jalen Milroe's future in the National Football League. But the talent level on what Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb had in Seattle and what they ended up with in Tuscaloosa last year offensively was a step down. I believe that those two together are the perfect combination. They're peanut butter and jelly. But I don't want to throw Nick Sheridan out with the bathwater just because last year was so inconsistent. The offense that they wanted to run was the offense that Ryan Grubb and Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer ran at Washington. And Jalen Milroe did not fit what they ran with Ryan Penix. If you go back and look at Michael Penix did not run the football as much as you would perceive a guy with his mobility would run. He'd run when he had to. He was very mobile in the pocket, but it was never built around a quarterback run game. Jalen Milroe was at his best when he was running the football. And Michael Penix, as I said, had great receivers, could make all the throws. Milroe was inconsistent at passing, and those receivers were inconsistent, and the offense was inconsistent. They had 1,000-yard rusher at Washington. They didn't have that at Alabama last year. They couldn't get a consistent run game going. And I don't put all that at Nick Sheridan, feet of Nick Sheridan. I believe that whomever the quarterback is, whether it's Ty Simpson, Keelan Russell, Austin Mack, in that quarterback room, the person that wins this quarterback battle will be a better fit for what they're trying to do offensively. And ultimately, maybe won't have the high point of the Georgia or LSU game, but ultimately will have a more consistent offensive output next year.
Lots to dig into from that response, because I do want to get to the quarterback stuff. But I think if you asked anybody what's the best thing for Alabama moving forward, they would pretty much unanimously say Ryan Williams. And while he was only 17 last year, in case you never heard that on a broadcast or anything, you know, you look at the 9 games after Georgia, and that's a large enough sample size, in my opinion. He never hit 85 receiving yards in a game in that stretch. He had one catch longer than 30 yards, but he had 7 drops compared to 3 touchdown catches. I feel like that wasn't discussed because how much the Milroe inconsistency was always going to be kind of like that. Oh yeah, but like look at what Milroe is doing throwing the football. Is there any sort of resetting the expectations for Ryan Williams as he's about to turn 18 years old? Something that I'm sure will be well documented on social media.
Well, I think if you go and just see Kalen DeBoer's comments after the season, after immediately, he sort of thanked his wide receivers for being patient, almost telling them This is not what we're going to look like in the future. I don't think he was apologizing directly for Jalen Milroe's inconsistency at throwing the football to them or the play calling or whatever, but he was saying to Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, any recruit that's coming at wide receiver, this is not the way we're going to look moving forward. So please be patient. We're a work in progress offensively. But you just look at the national champions and Jeremiah Smith. Texas took him out of the game. You can defensively, if you don't have some dogs at the 2 or 3 receiver, you can defensively take a great receiver with double coverage, help over the top, all that. You can take one great receiver out of a game. You need some other dogs on there to spread some things out, a run game or a good wide receiver or 3. And I don't know if Ryan Williams had that last year. Bernard was good. He was the benefactor of what Ryan Williams was able to do early in the season. He had some big games. Once that Georgia game happened, you started the game plan. Don't let Milroe run. Don't let Ryan Williams make catches. And then everything else, if they're going to beat us, they're going to beat us with the other 9 guys. Those 2 guys can't beat us. And that's the way they game planned the rest of the year. And Ryan Williams wasn't as big of a factor. You're spot on there. But again, I think it has to do with the scheme they want to run and the inconsistency of having to have a running quarterback to make last year work.
And again, worth noting, it's the best season by a true freshman receiver in the SEC since 2018, Jalen Waddle. So, I mean, I do need that context added to it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like the passing game was it was very inconsistent, and you didn't know, week to week what you were going to get from Jalen Milroe. And now everybody kind of can look back and go, well, why wasn't Ty Simpson more involved if it was that bad? I think there's some of it where DeBoer wants to make sure he gets his guy to the NFL. It's really hard to overcome that benching and how bad of a look that can potentially be for an offensive-minded head coach. But where do you believe Ty Simpson is at going into 2025? And is there any world in which he is not QB1 for week 1, and this could be Mac or it could be Russell who wins that job?
Oh, I think there's a possibility. I think it's his job to lose going in, but it'll be a quarterback battle. The 5-star recruit is on campus. He'll go through spring drills, all the offseason workout. Austin Mack was recruited by Ryan Grubb, by Nick Sheridan, by Kalen DeBoer to be at Washington. He came from Washington. So there are things they've liked about him since high school. So it is not Ty Simpson's job and lock it up right now. This will be a true battle. But he's a coach's son. He's waited his turn, and we had nothing but rave reviews about him coming from practice from all of last season. Um, it's you have to be inside Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan's head on why you didn't see more Ty Simpson in meaningful times last year. But you're trying to win the game. You won that Georgia game early on. You lost the Vandy game. Didn't have a lot of reps for the offense in that game. You go to Tennessee with only 1 loss. In that game, Milroe didn't run the ball, had a horrible game passing, but then you come back, you win LSU. It was at that point you're still in the college football playoffs, and then you go to the Oklahoma game, and the Oklahoma game was rock bottom for the season. Well, then you beat Auburn. You didn't want to make a change before the rivalry game. You don't want to lose that game.
True.
And now you're off to a bowl game, and you know it's going to be Jalen Milroe's last game. So you let him play there too, and it was a horrible game. So it's there was reasons why. Okay, we're going to pull the plug this week. That there was a reason why not to make a change all season long. Whether you want to say it was loyalty or performance, I personally believe Milroe with that group of players gave them the best chance of winning Saturday to Saturday. Now you flush that, you get away from what they were used to, and you start anew with a full off season, and you put in the Kalen DeBoer system. People laugh at me when I say Kalen DeBoer is in a rebuild mode in Tuscaloosa. When you look at all the talent he inherited on that roster from Nick Saban, and it was a very talented schedule. But if I play the guitar and I inherited the best piano in the world, that's not going to do me a lot of good if I play the guitar. I need a guitar to play. And I think they're working on having a guitar for Kalen DeBoer to play and not the best piano in the world.
Was the Justice Haynes transfer alarming to you? Just what it says about maybe the Bama running back room, what it says about the running game in general with DeBoer? Because I feel like if there's a question on offense, with even dating back to his time at Washington, that's kind of it. I talked about some of the Dylan Johnson usage, and how maybe that sort of forced him into more of a timeshare type role with the Bama backfield. And it's hard when you've got the quarterback run game involved. But was
That's
that
right.
alarming to see a guy that was so talented, so highly regarded, kind of just say, you know what, I'm going to find a situation at Michigan where even though that's a timeshare, I'm willing to take that on.
Yeah, but he still was going to be running back two coming into this year, so it's still going to be a shared situation. Jam is there, and Jam's going to be was going to beat him out again because he was a little better at pass pro, and I think he was a little better possibly at catching the football out of the backfield. Very close. Yeah, he's going to be a star. He'll be a star at Michigan. But they've got depth in that running back room with Hill and the recruits that are coming in. But you got Jam Miller back. So that one doesn't hurt. It's almost like when Isaiah Bond left to go to Texas last year. I was like, that doesn't hurt this Alabama receiving room. Isaiah Bond would have been just what Jeremy Bernard was. He'd have been just what the other guy. He wasn't going to be what Ryan Williams was.
Sure.
He ended up being at Texas exactly what I thought he was. He was a role player in a chorus line of a great receiving room. That's what he would have been in Tuscaloosa. The Caleb Downs exit last year was big time. Justice Haynes, him leaving, is going to be a superstar at Michigan, and that's a place that you know how they're going to play football. He'll fit in there perfectly. Not enough carries in Tuscaloosa for him to hang around, especially when he's got one more year there of running. If he wants to go to the NFL after that, then he'll be able to do that and be a one and done at Michigan. He's got an NFL future, but I think he was still going to be sharing carries with Jam and the rest of the running backs in Tuscaloosa. That one doesn't bother me. Doesn't impact to me the win loss total of Alabama at all.
Bama should have one of the better defenses in the SEC, maybe one of the better defenses in all of college football. And again, they finished 10th in scoring last year. But here's what I wonder: is as much as I love the guys that they have coming back with, Overton and Lawson and Damani Jackson at corner, a guy who really stepped up and was everything they kind of hoped he could be coming from USC. Was there a game outside of LSU where you thought, man, that group really handled its business against a respected offense? Like, what should be the expectation for that group? Because maybe I'm being too low on them because we like the guys coming back, but at the same time, I just don't know that that unit has shown, hey, we're a floor elevator, and that alone can sort of take care of all of those questions that we have on the offensive side of the ball.
And depending on where you think Tennessee, a playoff team's offense was, I thought that defense played good enough to win the game there. I mean, they weren't perfect in the second half, but they were good enough to win that game if the offense had showed up that day. Um, you go back to the Oklahoma game. That's a bad offense, but the Oklahoma offense wasn't great. But the Alabama offense put them in a horrible situation. The Michigan game, Alabama's offense put them in a horrible situation. I'm like you. I watched that team defensively, and I kept waiting for them to fold, and they never did down the stretch. They had a bad game against Vandy. And Oklahoma looked at that Vandy tape and said, "We're going to try to beat you just like Vandy did. We're going to let Jackson Arnold be Diego Pavia, and we're going to let him run, and we're going to option the run, and we're going to run off the edges, and you got to stop us." And Alabama did a poor job of doing that, like they did at Vandy. In the second half against Georgia, but Georgia was the SEC champions and number two seeded team in the NCAA college football playoffs. So that second half, they won the game, but they got torched in the second half. They had a pretty good first half. As a whole, though, I thought it was a win defensively for Kane Womack in the first year. I like the players they have coming back. It gives them some experience, a second year in the system. They got some experience on the backside and especially with Damani Jackson back, Saab back, Xavion Brown back, getting Deontay Lawson when he's healthy back, Justin Jefferson back on that linebacker line, and then a couple of dogs on the defensive line and LT Overton and Tim Keenan. So you've got a core there with some recruits coming in. Russaw will be good off the edge. Before he got hurt, he was really good. It'll be the calling card of this team. But you tell me what in modern day football when you don't try to milk the clock like Michigan in modern day football, if I'm only giving up 21 or less a game, that's pretty good to me. If my offense needs to be able to score 24 points for me to win a game, and that's about where I thought this defense was last year. I should be able to go score 24 points, and we should be able to win some football games with that defense.
You're right. And it's also maybe the reflection of a down year in the SEC with offenses. And maybe that's
Yeah.
why you can look back on that and go, you know what? You don't really see a lot of those games where they shut down a legitimately respected offense outside of probably the LSU game. But yeah, it's definitely a fair point. Maybe I'm a little bit too low. Maybe that's one of those groups that as the offseason progresses, I'll kind of open up to the idea
Uh,
of them being, potentially the best defense in the SEC.
well, I'll give you an example. Lenore Sellers will be a very early Heisman top five, wherever you want to put him. They beat him.
Had to
Nussmeier will
come
be,
back. Yeah.
yeah, but Nussmeier is a guy that is back. He'll be a Heisman candidate. They beat him on the road. They beat Brady Cook. Now he was injured, so he was hobbling
Yeah.
around out there. That was not a fair game. Great running back at Tennessee, and Nico, who will be back with rave reviews. Carson Beck, Heisman candidate. I mean, these are the quarterbacks they faced, and they got wins over most of those guys. It was the Diego Pavias and the Jackson Arnolds and the insert quarterback at Michigan that beat them. Crazy year.
How would you grade year one of the DeBoer era?
I gave it a flat C because the Georgia win skews it, the LSU win skews it, but the Oklahoma loss. When you got the playoffs in sight and that team was so offensively challenged, to me, there's just no way you should lose that football game. And if you win that football game, you're going to the college football playoffs. So I would go C. But when you're transitioning from, and we talked about this going in, and the whole transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer, everybody's like, it is so hard to replace a legend. It is so hard to follow a legend, and it is. It is. And then we get to the season, and it feels like everyone stopped grading Kalen DeBoer on that all of a sudden. It's like, oh my God, Kalen DeBoer is at Alabama, and they've lost 3 games. What has happened? Well, he's still replacing the legend we were talking about in January and February. It's just now the same season that he's replacing the legend in. It was very different. I mean, different practices, different way they handle the media, different the way he let them celebrate. Everything was different, and I'll be honest, I thought the players maybe took advantage of having more freedom than they had under Nick Saban,
That's a good
and I
point.
don't think I think that led to a lot of inconsistencies. They didn't really earn the freedom Kalen DeBoer gave. That's just the way Kalen DeBoer coached, and it was almost like, okay, I've got a strict teacher Monday through Thursday. Oh, we got a substitute on Friday. We're going to raise hell on Friday, and I thought the team raised a little bit of hell this year, which kept them. And some of those stories never get out, which kept them, I think, from being a consistent product. And I think in this form, Kalen DeBoer will be much better off in year two with his coaching staff. They'll be able to handle the room a little bit better. Uh, they won't feel like they owe anybody in the room anything for sticking around when Nick Saban left. And I expect this team to be a better reflection of what Kalen DeBoer is as a coach. And I think he's really, really good.
Do you expect them to be really active in the post spring window? Just knowing that they weren't really one of those teams that made splashy additions. Like you look at the 24/7 rankings of the top 50 transfer portal guys, and Bama didn't have one of them, which I thought they'd be much more active with some of those key spots. And that just wasn't the case. Would you expect to see Bama make those big time splashes post spring?
Isaiah Horton's a big pickup. He'll be a starter from Miami at wide receiver. You probably don't need a quarterback, I don't think. You don't need a running back. On the offensive line, I could see you getting an offensive lineman, one, but I feel really good at Proctor at left tackle, Brailsford at center. Both of those guys will be on some preseason All-American team or conference teams. Roberts and Formby at right guard, right tackle. I'm comfortable with those guys. It's a left guard replacing Tyler Booker, probably. You got a guy who's very talented coming in, hasn't been really proven yet, but maybe a little depth on the offensive line. Tight end room is good. You always need help on defense. Some numbers there. Probably could use a defensive lineman, but you have some recruits that are there. Um, you're talented on the defensive backfield with just the recruiting class you inherited. You didn't lose all those guys. You're moving Mbakwe, I guess, to a two-way position or on the wide receiver room. So maybe you go get an offensive lineman, maybe one more DB, maybe one more defensive lineman, but I don't think it'll be crazy. It's still a pretty good roster. I don't think it'll be crazy. I guess you do. You think it'll be crazy?
I think that there are two or three of those that'll come. I just do.
Yeah.
Maybe that's ambitious, and maybe I'd still
Well, I
even
just
go.
named I named three. So yeah, I mean, give me one defensive lineman, one offensive lineman, and maybe another DB. Yeah.
Do you think a Jameson Williams type addition is ever realistic again? Did that set the standard too high for post spring transfer additions that could possibly happen? Because I always tell myself, oh, Bama will just pick up somebody like that that's like buried on the depth
Yeah.
chart at Ohio State and turn him into a star.
Well, Tate was that guy, right? He would have been if Nick Saban was still the coach, they would have made an offer for him and tried to lure him away. But the difference was you had all those receivers that were going to be back at Ohio State, and Jamison Williams was the odd man out, and you probably needed to come to Alabama to get on the field, and that's how good the Ohio State wide receiver room would be. I'm trying to think of a room that would be that good around college football. There's room to play at Ohio State at receiver. Probably, probably, an offensive lineman in the Texas room. That Texas offensive line is really, really good. If I was looking for somebody, I'd probably try to steal a Texas, offensive lineman who's destined to be a backup if he's not happy after spring football.
It's not a bad way to go about it.
Yeah,
Just
I'm
take
not
whatever the big
tampering.
boys. You're
I'm
not
not tampering. I'm just saying that that's a pretty good offensive line room that Kyle Flood has there in Austin. I'd take one of those second tiers there and plug him into Tuscaloosa.
Very true. Last one for you. What would be DeBoer hitting expectations or getting on track, if you want to call it that, in 2025? Is it playing in an SEC championship? Is it Bama hosting a first round playoff game? Like, what is that line of expectation that this team needs to meet to sort of quiet some of the skepticism around his future?
I mean, it's going to be, again, I'm old enough to have lived through Bear Bryant. So for a long, long period of time, it was you were gauged by are you contending and playing for a national championship? And back then it was polls, so there were no playoffs. You just needed to be in the conversation for the national championship. And Ray Perkins wasn't. And it was a long time before, long time by Alabama standards before they went from 1979 until winning one in 1992. I know it's 12 years, and it's shocking to some people, but that was a long, long time. And then from 1992 until Nick Saban in 2009, it was even a longer period of time and many, many years of not being in the hunt for a national championship. So for Kalen DeBoer next year, this close after Nick Saban, making the college football playoffs is a minimum. That's a successful season or not. And once you make it in there, Alabama fans will not be happy that you make it in, you lose the first round, or you only win two games or three games. But the minimum is to make it back to the college football playoffs. I mean, it's 12 teams. Coming off of Nick Saban, Alabama fans never thought they would miss a 12-team playoffs. How easy will that be to make? It's 12 teams now. We were always either in or just out of a 14 playoffs. We'll always be in a 12. Well, now you've missed one. You want to get back into the 12, and that will be a successful season just getting back.
Yeah, because I think to myself, Bama fans wouldn't have been happy if Tennessee's season this past year played out for them next year. If you get blown out in a first round playoff game, then that's kind of like on the road. You don't get the ability to host it. That still probably would not leave people feeling like, oh my gosh, this is everything is right on track and everything is going perfectly fine. But context will be needed for all of that, because who knows what's in store. It was a
Yeah.
very interesting year in Tuscaloosa, to say the least.
I'd say Tennessee fans probably ended up, pretty blah about their season. They made the playoffs, but it didn't end the way they wanted. The regular season didn't really go exactly the way they wanted. Um, Georgia probably felt the same way. Texas probably felt. I mean, I don't think anybody in the SEC walked away saying. I mean, South Carolina feels pretty good about their year.
Vandy.
Vandy, Florida felt pretty good about their year.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people left the SEC this year going, man, okay, that was it. Let's paint some paintings. Let's celebrate.
Might just be the new normal. Might just be the new normal. Everybody just comes away feeling bad after they felt in early October like they were going to be competing for a playoff spot, and everybody kind of came away going, "You know what? Looking back, that wasn't fun. That actually wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be."
I mean, is that not the NFL? I mean,
It's
is that
true.
I mean the Bills just they ball in hand and a chance to go to the Super Bowl and won a playoff game again this year. Did all these great things, but how does it feel to be a Bills fan today?
It's a good point. It's a really good point. SEC fans, just you are the new Buffalo Bills. Apparently,
Well,
that's.
let's don't say that. Let's don't say that. Yeah,
Jim,
let's
you're the
don't say
best.
that. Thank
We'll
you.
talk soon on the next round. Everybody go watch that 9 to noon Central, wherever you get internet, I guess is the
That's
only way to
right.
say that. Yeah.
That's
Jim,
right.
Jim
Start
really
with
appreciate it.
YouTube. Start with
Yeah,
YouTube and go somewhere else. Yeah,
exactly. Appreciate it, man.
no problem.
All right. Well, before we do Lad of the Week, we had talked last pod about you having your apology letter to the Midwest for the terms of our college football playoff bracket bet that you lost. You do not have that today, but you do have an IOU of
I have a
sorts.
promise. Yes, and
Okay.
we talked about this off air, but I've instead of doing a formal like letter style apology, I'm going to do a song. But then I remember that you hate it when I sing, so that's
Correct.
you got to consider your audience and their ears, and that would just have made you upset, and I might have upset you. There might be some duel we would have to do via Midwest Customs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for right now a female vocalist to sing the song that I have written or remixed, and so we got boots on the ground there. We're trying to figure it out. I feel pretty good. I don't want to exactly employ the listeners right now and have them waste their time on it because I got a couple of good leads. But by Thursday, I'll have you something.
This feels like you will definitely be using AI to help. As long I don't want to. We can't have this be an AI generated apology letter.
No, no, no.
Okay. Now, if you get AI help on the vocals, I'll
No,
support
that's what
that.
I'm saying. I don't know if AI is going to do the vocals. I think I need a person to really like pronounce some of these words and such.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
There might be some resources to help you out. So as long as you are able to come up with your own original words for this, you will be fulfilling the terms of our bet. So that's fine.
Perfect.
All right. Song upcoming. Lad of the week. I'll start us off, if that's all right. Second mention of him this pod, including the lead into Dunaway. But Liam Cohen is my lad of the week. The doppelganger himself, who is the new coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, might have burned a bridge or two with his exit from the Bucks. Very, very bizarre the way that all played out. I was texting with my brother about it when it looked like he was going to come back to Tampa, get that deal to be the highest paid coordinator in the SEC, or not the SEC, in the NFL,
He's done.
not the SEC. Check my phone. Is Liam coming back to the SEC? He could be, but to be the highest paid coordinator in the NFL and essentially be like what Ben Johnson was this past year, and then just kind of reset the market, and all of a sudden his price is going to go up, and then don't you know it, Trent Baalke gets fired. Jags a little bit more attractive now that they have the vacancy at GM, and don't you know it, 26 hours of unanswered calls and the debate about family members being sick and what, it's just a mess. Just seems like an absolute mess. I follow Liam's wife on Twitter too, and so like when I first saw her tweet, it was like 5 minutes after she had tweeted. She never tweets about anything. I was like, oh, that's definitely going to blow up. And then it's, of course that ends up making the rounds very soon after, about how, Liam was that their child was in the hospital, and, just a mess. And it went all over the place. But despite all of that and the hurt feelings that definitely caused, I am happy for the guy because in my interactions with him, he has been just awesome. He's been fantastic. And I met him in 2021 when I went to Lexington, and I was doing a story on him and Wandale Robinson, and got to spend some time at the facility and meet him. And we did the whole Spider-Man meme in person, basically. And the amount of times I've shown that picture to members of our family being like, could he be related to us? is high. It's very high. And I've told the story as well of when my brother and his wife were back in Muncie visiting their my brother's wife's family, and they were training for a half marathon, and they're running by Ball State's campus, and they look over by this hill, and Liam Cohen is there. My brother's like, "That's Liam Cohen, just hanging out." And he was about to about to start his second stint as Kentucky's offensive coordinator, and they chatted up for like 10-15 minutes, and Liam messages me like right after, before my brother even does, going, "I just ran into your brother. What? How did that happen? Just so
Now
weird."
there are three of us. This is weird.
There's three of us. We're all. It's very strange. But Liam has just always been especially good. Even coming on the pod as he was getting ready to move from Lexington to or getting ready to move back to Lexington for the second stint. And I know that him going out the way they did at Kentucky was frustrating, and they wish that he could have stayed longer after he said he was going to establish roots. But happy that guy's getting an NFL head coaching job. It's kind of cool. Somebody that's just been that type of dude, and seeing him have the year that he had in Tampa was fun to watch, and very weird doing double takes of my Twitter feed, being like, "That's not a picture of me. That's not a picture of me. We're good."
Yeah, I think, this is a guy that we do have like kind of a insider perspective on weirdly because you've had several interactions with him. And I think it's so funny that and guys, look, I was nice to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers randomly a couple of weeks ago. So I'm gonna kind of show you some tough love here. You're not gonna make me think that Liam Cohen is a bad guy because we've seen him be nice to us because someone said, hey, I want to go work with Trevor Lawrence, like 4 good pass catchers, a GM that I get to pick over your team with pretty much like Baker Mayfield and some dudes. All right. Like, you guys are a Glazer owned sports organization. I know Tom Brady came in and made you feel really special for a minute, but this is, don't sit here and act like this is some Dallas Cowboys level job that this guy is like, well, no, hold on. He's our offensive coordinator, so he should stay here.
They want him to be the coach in waiting. They're hoping that the agreed upon contract to be the highest paid coordinator in the NFL was going to be honored. And so from that standpoint, they feel scorned. NFL head coaching jobs are hard to come by, man.
Listen, man, Joe Brady has now left my team hanging 3 different times, and I'm not mad at him once. Okay. If that makes you feel better about yourself, this is how this works. If you wanted the guy to be the coach, give him the head coaching job.
Probably true. Probably true. Yeah. He would admit he's not gone about his exits the best possible way every single time. I think we could say that, but it's going to be cool to watch. Going to be cool to watch him running his own NFL team. And obviously I'm rooting for that guy, and let the bit live on.
Yeah. Speaking of bits, I'm going to make this one quick. This one to me seems a little obvious, but I want to give it some shine. Joe Moorhead alum Saquon Barkley. My God, is this guy fun to watch. I haven't seen playoff football look like this since I was a child. In the snow, sweat, heat going off of the dude. We're watching him throw guys sideways. We're watching him hit the B button. It looks like he's playing in rookie in college football 25. He's putting dudes in the dirt. Oh my God, what an
reverse hurdling dudes.
Reverse hurt, like one of the most insane. We have been told by all the nerds for like 15 years that running backs don't matter. This guy 2 carries has there's 3 carries, 2 touchdowns. This guy is averaging over 100 yards per playoff game. He had 3 and 2 touchdowns in the final 2 games to go to the Super Bowl. What an insane, ridiculous athlete Saquon Barkley. I know I'm not breaking any news here. The fact that he survived the New York Giants as long as he did, the fact that he came to the Eagles and immediately looked amazing. I was a little bit skeptical of his usage with the Giants, i.e. I didn't think he was a top 5 running back because I thought they were a bad team. And buddy, getting him on a smart team, he looks so unstoppable. He looks like one of the best running backs I've ever seen, with shades of Adrian Peterson, who is my favorite runner of all time. So I just love watching this dude play. And, hey, Jaden Daniels can't play DB. We learned. Go Birds. Rooting for you guys in the Super Bowl.
I love Saquon so much, man. It's been fun to watch him the last 10 years and see the player that he has become. And I was worried initially when he got hurt as often as he did with the Giants.
Right.
Man, he's not going to end up living up to this hype. I think
little Fournette and Jacksonville vibes there, it felt.
Yeah, a little bit at times. You're just kind of wondering, man, is he going to be this decorated guy that it just ends up being, oh, this is why you don't draft this type of guy this early in the NFL draft. And I'm not.
You can find one of this type of guy, you draft him wherever, kind of like Brock Bowers.
Saquon he's so unbelievably special, and I hope that he ends up getting to win a Super Bowl. Do I think he will? Do I think that'll be in the cards? No.
I hope
but never say never when you got Saquon. Never say never, man. He is just ridiculously fun. God, this is my show. Liam Cohen and Saquon Barkley are the lads of the week.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about. All right, just in case you forgot, off-season schedule means we record on Monday, pods come out on Tuesday, we record on Thursday, pods come out on Friday. That will be the schedule moving forward. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at SatDownSouth, at CJ Guerra, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.